Hello and welcome everybody to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. We have more updates coming out of the college football playoff discussions that we will get to. A lot of things happening very quickly out in Texas right now. Then we're going to jump into some first-year quarterbacks. We have a lot of guys starting for their first year under center for their team, so we will get into expectations for all of those guys. Then we have a little bit of a sequel. We did break out defensive players a little bit before, probably about 2 weeks ago. We have part 2 for you today because there are so many names that have a chance to make big breakout seasons in 2024. And then finally, we are going to go to the new era that we're in college football, or at least in this part of the calendar. We are at spring games. There are a ton that are starting even this weekend, and we have to break them all down, let you guys know what the schedule is, and all of that type of stuff. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all, we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to see your questions across the screen, and we can maybe have a fun back and forth, or you can ask a question that you've been wondering about. The best way to do that is to use the link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all, because you can see your name on the screen, maybe ask a question that you're wondering about in the middle of a segment, and I can get to it as quickly as possible. Again, that's gsmcpodcast.net. But let's jump right in, because there's been a lot of stuff happening around the playoff right now. As we all know, there have been a ton of discussions around the 14-team playoff starting in 2026, and yesterday was the first day that we got real progress. It felt like ACC and the Big 12 decided that they were going to agree to the current model, mainly over revenue distribution that is currently out there. We got more details on that as well that we'll talk about here in a second. But the next step is going to be every other conference and Notre Dame agreeing as well. And it looks like that is going to happen at some point today. Not sure exactly what time they're going to meet. It said the deadline was midday today, so I'm sure sometime this morning they will be getting together, the 10 FBS conference commissioners and Notre Dame, to approve this new model, because a lot of them seem to be big fans of it behind closed doors, so it seems like it'll flow right through very smoothly. But let's get to the new details that came out about the money and about the revenue allocation. Ross Dellinger, again, has just been incredible with all of this. He released these numbers after the show yesterday, so I wanted to make sure we got to him today. One thing that we did know is the new deal with ESPN and the college football playoff is going to be 6 years, around $7.8 billion. And that's about $1.3 billion a year. Obviously, a remarkable amount of money to go around to everyone, but it is going to be allocated a little bit differently depending on the conference. So let's start with the big boys, the guys that have been kind of flexing their muscles throughout these last couple of weeks in these discussions. The Big 12 and the SEC, or the Big 10 and the SEC, will be getting 29% of the revenue each. So combined, that would be 58% of the entirety of the revenue, which is something that had been reported. But a little bit new detail to this is the ACC is looking to get 17.1%, while the Big 12 gets 14.7%. And I think I was trying to discern, the big reasoning behind this. The ACC, obviously, having teams like Miami and Florida State and Clemson help a ton. As we know in college football, the big teams are the ones that, draw the most attention, draw the most money, and have the most power in a lot of ways. So the ACC having that upper level team that is massive brands in the world of college football, I think really helped them against the Big 12 here, where, they have some really good teams, they have some really good programs, but when you compare Utah to Florida State, or Arizona to Clemson, or even, Oklahoma State to Miami, they're just two different games, right? So the ACC was able to flex their muscles a little bit that way, and also might just help with their battle against Florida State, which we'll get to here in a second as well, because there's a lot of stuff happening there kind of as we speak, honestly. But the group of five seems to have gotten 9% of the overall revenue. Notre Dame all the way down at 1%, which is still a ton of money, I promise you that. And then there is a whole 0.2% left for Oregon State, Washington State, and UConn. If they were to be a part of the playoff, if they were to participate, that's how much they would get, which is a tough break among, a year of tough breaks for Oregon State and Washington State. But let's jump into what all of this means and why all of these FBS commissioners are starting to kind of fall in line. First of all, the Group of Five had really no choice in this matter. I wish they did. I wish they had a bigger voice in this. But at the end of the day, the Group of Five pretty much had to take what was ever put in front of them because it's the thing that keeps them alive. It's the thing that keeps the SEC and the Big Ten in the equation, in the same equation that you're in, instead of, taking their ball and playing elsewhere. And I think, as we all know, and have a lot of people around the country have been saying, the SEC and the Big Ten, if they walk away, the money dries up very quickly elsewhere, and it would start with the Group of Five teams. So this was a rather easy choice for them. This was all about just staying alive, staying afloat, and then you take it a day at a time from here forward, because the Group of Five obviously is going to be kind of gutted throughout this next, bout of conference realignment once the Florida State and ACC mess is figured out. But for the time being, the Group of Five is in on the playoff. They, have a seat at the table at the very least. So it's not their ideal scenario, I'm sure of that. But at the end of the day, right now it's about survival for pretty much everyone else other than the SEC and the Big Ten. So can't blame them at all for that. And I think it brings me back to the point that the SEC and the Big Ten were fully ready to jump off into their own world and be their own thing, and it kind of was holding the rest of the group hostage in a certain sense, where your two choices were: you can join us in a agreement that does not favor you, vastly favors the big dogs, or you can, not really be a thing in maybe a decade, because SEC and Big Ten break off and they take Florida State and they take Clemson and Miami and North Carolina and Virginia, and then they start poaching Big 12 schools like Arizona and Utah and Oklahoma State, Texas Tech. There's so many things that would happen if the SEC and the Big Ten were to walk away. So this is a decision that is mainly about kicking the can down the road. And I say that mainly because there is something that they're calling a look-in clause in this new agreement in 2028, which essentially just means they can revisit all of these revenue arrangements, all of the format of the playoff altogether can be revisited in 2028 if, the landscape has shifted. And I think we all know that the landscape shifts very, very quickly and has shifted just immense amounts in the last couple of years. So I would be surprised if it wasn't a lot different in 2028. So I think from all sides of this, it's all, everyone's kicking the can down the road. The SEC and the Big Ten are in a position where I think they're looking at this saying, okay, we'll hang out till 2028 where we'll have more power, and either we'll be able to allocate more money to ourselves, or then we break off and become our own thing. I think the Group of Five is just trying to stay alive. I think the ACC is trying to keep as many teams in that conference as possible if Florida State does end up getting out. I think the Big 12 is just trying to be viable in all of this, because it is an absolute mess with the SEC and the Big Ten pulling a lot of the strings. So it's not necessarily the format that I was hoping for. I think if there's any place to kind of level the playing field of sorts, it would be here. But that's the world we live in, right? The people that have the most power are the SEC and the Big Ten, and they have the most power because they play the best football. So it's kind of hard to argue with from that perspective. But a lot of people made survival decisions yesterday, and I totally understand that. And a couple more are going to make some today, which makes total sense. But a lot of stuff is going to happen very quickly now that was kind of festering under the surface, because this was the first big domino to drop. We had to know what the future of the playoff looked like. We had to know what the format looks like, which we're still a little bit blurry about, and I'll jump into the different options here in a second. But the ACC and Florida State are still battling it out. They're still in the court system. They're still trying to figure out what's going on there, but I think we'll start to get answers fairly soon, because this was the thing they were waiting for. They were waiting for to see what that number was going to be for the ACC, how much the Big Ten and the SEC were going to get, or were the SEC and the Big Ten going to break off. So there were a ton of implications that could have affected their discussions that now are answered. So I think we'll be getting some answers fairly soon about the ACC and Florida State. I think the interesting thing, Florida State, once they leave, which I tend to believe they will, just because college football tends to work where enough people plus enough money equals you can do what you want in some scenarios. So I think Florida State will find their way out of the conference, and I think others will follow. And I think that's the big worry in 2028 is the SEC and the Big Ten, in my eyes at least, and I think in a lot of people's eyes, have no intention on stopping. They have no intention on slowing down on their kind of death march around college football. So I think there's a certain amount of worry that even if it's 14 teams right now and we have everyone involved for the time being, come 2028 we're going to have these same discussions, and they're going to be with a even more powerful SEC and Big Ten, and it's going to make things a little bit more complicated for the people below them, because the gap is only going to widen. So I guess that's a problem for 2028, I suppose. Hopefully they start talking about that earlier, because Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner, has said multiple times throughout this entire thing that these are all things they should have been figuring out in 2021, 2, and 3, and not in 2024, when all of this stuff has to happen very, very quickly, because you have TV deals to figure out, you have revenue distribution to figure out, a million different things that some are new, some are not, but they take time to figure out, and it kind of forced their hand to make this happen quickly, which then forced these smaller conferences to join in with not a lot of choice in the matter. But there's still a lot up in the air with this, and I think the biggest thing, obviously, is the format. I think most of us fans, we're interested in how much money is going to each place. We're interested in the dynamics of that, but at the end of the day, the format is what we are all really interested in, what we're all really waiting for. So there are three on the table right now that seem to be kind of the main three. I would love to see another one introduced, which I'll get into at the very end. But the first three is obviously the first one is the one that was, I think, gaining a lot of traction, or not gaining a lot of traction, honestly, last week, which was the SEC and the Big Ten getting 3 auto bids each, the Big 12 and ACC getting 2, Group of 5 getting 1, and then 3 at-large bids. That one got tons of pushback, mostly because the SEC and the Big Ten wanted auto buys through the first round for their conference title champions, and the ACC and the Big 12 weren't having that. So I would be surprised if that's the one they go with, or at least if that's the one they go with that caveat of the SEC and the Big Ten champion getting that buy. But the second idea is roughly along the same lines, but just more at-large bids. So you have 2 auto bids for the Big Ten and the SEC, respectively. Then you have 1 across the board with the ACC, Big 12, and G5. So probably conference champions in the Big 12 and the ACC, and then the highest-rated Group of 5 team, and then 7 at-large bids. And then there's the classic 5+9 model, where you would essentially just be adding 2 at-large bids to the current 12-team format of 5+7. And to be totally honest, my personal choice would be all at-large bids. No auto bids for essentially anyone, because I think in a sport where you don't play a lot of cross-conference matchups, it's really hard to fully gauge what team is better than the other. And I think some type of, I don't even think we need a committee, but I suppose that's another conversation too. I think the BCS model would be a little bit better of figuring out the 14 teams that we actually want in the playoff and not make it a ton of auto bids. But at the end of the day, you want everyone involved, so I fully understand why that is part of the discussions and likely will be one of the decisions they get to. But I think this is one of those things that is a little bit bittersweet. You know, I'm happy to start to get to the end of this kind of saga and start to get some answers on what the short-term future looks like, at least. But at the end of the day, I've never been a big fan of the 14-team playoff. I don't necessarily love the 12-team. I was a big fan, a big advocate of possibly a 6-team, but at the end of the day, once the Pac-12 started to dissolve, I think that went out the window very quickly. So I fully understand where we're at. I think the 14 team will make a lot of fun games and a lot of really good atmospheres, but there is that worry that the interest in the everyday or every weekend Saturday in August or in September and October, November will be diminished a little bit, and that's the worry that I have. But you never know until it comes. So we'll get a little taste with the 12 team, and then the 14 team seems to be right around the corner. But we'll wait on the format. That is something that I'm sure will be out early next week, if not sometime this weekend. But for right now, that is the playoff update we have. Much more to come on that topic because although they are ironing out, the basics of the agreement, the format is going to be quite the battle, I'm sure. So I will definitely keep you updated with all of that information. But for now, we are going to take a short break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about some first-year starters at quarterback. There are a lot of guys taking their first reps under center, or at least becoming the guy throughout the entire offseason and into next season. And I want to break down all those guys and what to expect from them going into this season. So definitely stick around, and we will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the updates to the playoff, a lot of things happening today with some agreements coming with the revenue agreement, but we're done with that for the time being because there is going to be a ton of segments about the playoff coming up. But for the time being, let's talk about some first-year starters at quarterback. There are a ton of guys across the country that are very interesting prospects, whether they are sophomores or juniors. They're taking over for the first time under center for their teams, and it is a lot on their shoulders. So let's jump through some of the guys to watch and what I expect from them. And let's start with the guy that I am honestly most excited to watch, maybe of any quarterback in the entire country next year, Nico Iamaleava from Tennessee. He is someone that, on paper, he looks like Josh Heupel's dream. The dude can put the ball all over the field. He is very talented, is athletic enough to extend plays when you need him to, super accurate, can do a number of things on the football field that are just mind-boggling, and he showed some of that in the bowl game against Iowa. He went for 151 through the air and a touchdown, And when you're playing Iowa's defense, that is not half bad at all, especially in your first start. So a huge boost for Tennessee fans, but as Tennessee fans know from even a year ago, a bowl game performance is not necessarily indicative of what the next year will look like. So I think they're kind of walking on eggshells talking about Nico right now, but he's one of my favorite players going into this season. He's a guy that really could explode the entire world of college football because Tennessee has a ton of talent on that team. They have a ton of really good receivers. Squirrel White and Brew McCoy are going to be back this year, along with Chaz Nimrod, and we have a number of really good players on defense. James Pierce Jr. coming off the edge is one of the best edge rushers, if not the best, in the entire country coming back this year. So a lot to like about this Tennessee team. So if Iamaleava can kind of burst onto the scene and, show off what he's been able to show off on tape so far, I mean, the Tennessee team could really shock some people in 2024. Another team that is kind of in a little bit of different situation with their quarterback, but could easily make noise is Oklahoma and Jackson Arnold. He had a little bit different of a bowl game performance than Iamaleava. He had 3 picks to go along with a fumble against Arizona, a team that was playing just insanely good football towards the end of the year, and also making his first start, never an easy proposition for a young kid. So I don't want to say, totally throw that out the window, but take that with a grain of salt because this kid is uber talented. He is built like an NFL quarterback today, which is just insane to see. The dude is got to be 230, 6'3" at the very least. He's just an absolute physical beast. I think his arm talent is really, really good. And he's someone that is going to be so important for Oklahoma this year because as we've seen with Oklahoma in the past couple of years, not so much last year, but the year prior, when that first quarterback goes down, there's some worries behind him. Obviously, bringing in Casey Thompson, the veteran that actually used to play at Texas before bouncing around to a number of different places and landing at his home state, Oklahoma, I think it helps a little bit, but at the end of the day, Jackson Arnold's your guy, and if he can succeed at the highest level, Oklahoma is a team that could surprise a lot of people. But at the end of the day, one thing really is going to define Jackson Arnold's season, and it's how far the Oklahoma offensive line has come. He is not going to be able to be successful if they are going to not be able to protect him for up to 2.5 seconds, not let him go through reads, and not let him make some easy decisions from time to time. So that O-line success is directly correlated to Jackson Arnold's success, so it'll be interesting to see if they can put it together on the offensive line, because if they can, really the sky's the limit for the talent that this kid has. But let's jump into another SEC guy, Garrett Nussmeier, a guy that I feel like I've seen play football so many different times because he has been under a number of really good quarterbacks that have come through LSU, mainly Jaden Daniels the last couple of years, and he is such a pure thrower of the football. Everything looks very easy to him, the motion is very comfortable, and the ball explodes out of his hands. So he's someone that really jumps off the page when you see him playing. Obviously, first time under center, you never really know what it's going to look like. He is officially the guy. He needs to be the leader. He needs to be all over the field. He needs to, be kind of more of a vocal guy than maybe he's used to being in past years. So there is kind of a toss-up here, but a lot of things are going in his direction. Obviously, the wide receiver group is great. You have Kyron Lacey, CJ Daniels, Chris Hilton, tons of really good weapons there. Mason Taylor is one of the best tight ends in the entire country. And the O-line should be really solid, especially with Will Campbell, who, if you were to ask me, I would say he's the best offensive lineman in the entire country. At left tackle, there is a ton to like about Garrett Nussmeier, but it's always a toss-up when it's a first year starting, even if it's a guy that has a ton of experience in the program and in the offense. But let's jump to a guy that has no experience in this offense, but has been around for quite some time. Brock Vandegrift at Kentucky. He was a transfer from UGA, mostly only really got garbage time minutes, so we didn't really get to see what he's fully capable of, but the talent is there. It's very clear. He was one of the top-rated quarterbacks coming out of high school, and he'll have plenty to work with at Kentucky. Berrien Brown, Jamori McClain, and Dane Key is a very, very good trio to start with. One of the best wide receiver trios probably in the SEC going into this year. Chip Trainum over from Ohio State at running back right next to him. The O-line should be really good, led by Marquise Cox. It is going to be a tough schedule. That's the case in every SEC game, but this is a guy that has a ton of upside, and if they can unlock it and new offensive coordinator Bush Hamdan can unlock it, the sky's the limit for this Kentucky team, and they could be a team that you look up and you see another undefeated Kentucky team when you didn't expect it. But Brock Vandegrift, I'm very interested to see what he can do. Another guy taking over. This guy is filling probably the biggest shoes in the entire country. Miller Moss, the starting quarterback likely at USC this year, taking over for Caleb Williams is somewhat of a nightmare. He was essentially everything to that offense in a number of different ways throughout last season and obviously throughout his Heisman season. But Miller Moss really showed that gear in the bowl game. He tossed for 6 touchdowns, and he just absolutely lit up the Louisville defense, which is a really solid defense all throughout the year. Having Lincoln Riley on your sideline obviously helps a ton. I think USC fans are very excited about this kid. Obviously, the offensive line is going to play a huge part in this, but Miller Moss could put together a little Heisman dark horse season if he can get his feet under him very quickly as the new starter of USC. But very excited to see what he can do in the Big Ten for the first time for USC. Now let's jump on to some different conferences. Avery Johnson at Kansas State is someone that I am very interested in because the athletic ability is just off the charts. He is a very different player than Will Howard was, the guy that has been starting there for a number of years and has now made his way to Ohio State. He's definitely more of a runner, definitely more of an athlete, but his passing ability is not necessarily too shabby by any means. He can definitely sling the rock around. It's just a little bit more consistency there is going to be the next key for him, I think. He played a number of times throughout the year. I think started a couple of games for Kansas State as well. So he's a little bit different than the rest of these guys where you kind of know what you're getting, but there are tons of changes on the offensive line. Connor Beebe, one of the best offensive linemen in the country a year ago, is out. Dante Cephas came in from Penn State at receiver, who never really caught on while he was in State College, but still a very talented kid. I'm a big fan of Avery Johnson. I think he has every ability to burst on the scene, win a Big 12 title, and then be in the playoff. And I know for a fact there are a number of defenses that do not want to see Avery Johnson in the playoff for sure. Another guy that kind of mirrors Avery Johnson in some ways is Aiden Childs, the quarterback up at Michigan State. He came over from Oregon State with Jonathan Smith, played sparingly throughout last season with Oregon State, but it's clear the second he steps on the field, this kid is an elite athlete. He does the speed is out of this world. His shiftiness is remarkable, and the question is, what can he do when you have to run the entire playbook, which is a big jump for him, and also a big jump for him moving over to the Big Ten when his team was kind of left out on an iceberg over there in Corvallis, Oregon. But at the end of the day, Jonathan Smith is going to field competitive teams. That's something that I feel very confident in. He has shown that time and again. So I'm not necessarily worried about Michigan State being a competent team, but they're a bit of an unknown going into 2024. But if Aiden Childs can burst onto the scene, then don't be surprised if they get a big-time upset in October or November and totally ruin someone's season. But now we get to the guy that I think all of you are waiting for, the guy that everyone is very interested in, Dylan Raiola, someone that had the most interesting recruiting cycle of recent history for sure. He came over to Georgia to play his high school senior season at Buford High School, then decided, while he was committed to Georgia, then decided he was going to go to Lincoln, Nebraska, and be kind of the prodigal son returning. His father played there. His uncle is on the staff as the O-line coach. Tons to like about this kid. I mean, physically, he is just built different. He is a absolute tank. Can do a number of really incredible things and is really athletic in a number of ways. So I really like his ability, but at the end of the day, he is a freshman stepping into the Big Ten. So there are going to be some rough patches. There are going to be some times where he makes some decisions that are a little head-scratching, but at the end of the day, he is very talented, and if it's not 2024, 2025, he could very easily step onto the scene and be one of the better quarterbacks in the entire country. But we're going to learn a lot about him in 2024 as well, and I'm very excited to see what he looks like. Another guy that has been waiting in the wings, kind of like Garrett Nussmeier, but he has found a new place to play football to get that chance. Malik Murphy, he is someone that I have just insane amounts of respect for. You know, I personally am a Texas fan, so I've been following this guy a little bit more closely, but he came into Texas in the same class that Quinn Ewers came in from Ohio State in, didn't blink, decided he was going to still come to Texas, wanted to be a Longhorn, so came onto campus, worked his butt off, was the backup for some time, and then Arch Manning came in, and everyone started to fawn over him and totally forget that Malik Murphy was this remarkable player that was on the that was in that group, and he kind of just kept working. He didn't bat an eye. He didn't worry about it. He didn't get upset by any means. He was just an ultimate teammate throughout his entire time. So incredibly excited to see him get his shot. But also just a PS here, the fact that he had to miss the playoff game because he had to jump into the transfer portal with all of the quarterbacks going is another reason why this schedule that we've set up in college football is insanely broken and needs to be fixed. But back to the kid himself, arm strength for this kid is off the charts. It's absolutely insane how far and how fast he can throw the football. Obviously, with that comes some accuracy issues. He is a little all over the place at times, but that's a very fixable problem. He just needs to add a little change up to his arsenal, and then if he can do that, this Duke team could be really good because Manny Diaz is going to field a really good defense. I know that for a fact. So Malik Murphy opening up that offense, a number of things could happen for the Blue Devils in 2024. And then finally, let's get to the reigning national champions. Alex Orji will likely be the starting quarterback there, at least in week 1. And the question is, will he be there down the road? I think this is about as much pressure as anyone has been under in the entire list that we just went under. Taking over for J.J. McCarthy, a guy that every Michigan fan loved, brought them to the mountaintop. Jim Harbaugh said he's the best quarterback in Michigan history, which there's a good argument to be made that that's the case. Taking over him is not an easy task. This is another guy that is very, very athletic, more of a runner than a passer, but in the Michigan offense, the way things work is as long as it's on time and on target, you are going to be okay. So he doesn't have to be a superhero. He just has to execute. If he can't execute in the first couple of weeks, they have a week 2 matchup against Texas, which will be huge for him. If he, doesn't play too well in that game and they don't feel super confident in him throwing the ball, I think Jaden Davis, the freshman, could definitely step up into that role and possibly lead them down the stretch. But for right now, I'd bet my money on Alex Orji to be the starter at quarterback for Michigan, and we'll see what happens from there. But a number of guys to watch throughout this process. The first-year quarterbacks, I feel like there are a ton across the country that could totally flip the entire college football world on its head if one of these guys can explode. But for right now, we are going to take a break from that, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some breakout players in 2024. We did defense probably about 2 weeks ago. We're going to do part 2 of defense today because there are a number of guys I didn't get to in the first one that I just have to get to in this one. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all the first-year quarterbacks across the country and what to expect from them in 2024. And now let's talk about some other guys and what to expect from them in 2024. We have a number of talented defenders that maybe were a little bit under the radar last year that are ready to burst onto the scene this year. This is the second time we've done this, so if you want to go check out part 1, it is on our page on YouTube, so definitely check that out. But there are tons of guys, so let's jump right in. And the guy that jumped off the page last year as a freshman was CJ Allen, the linebacker at UGA. Middle linebackers at UGA tend to be really good. There are a number of guys that come to mind when you think about that position, whether you want to go all the way back to Jarvis Jones or a little bit more recently in Roquan Smith. Jamon Dumas-Johnson even a year ago was a very talented kid, but CJ Allen took over and he did not look back. He was the only freshman on UGA last year to play over 300 snaps, which is just a remarkable achievement on a team that does not play freshmen very often. But in my eyes, this kid could be a Roquan Smith level middle linebacker for Georgia. He could be a kid that leaves with a butt kiss award and leaves with everyone in Athens singing his praises because he's just uber talented. There is not a tackle that he cannot make. He is athletic enough to drop into coverage even at his size. And having guys like Smile Munden and Rylan Wilson right next to him is going to be super helpful because in a lot of these defensive rotations especially, it's about keeping guys fresh, and especially a guy that plays with as much energy and, speed as CJ Allen does. Keeping him fresh is going to be a huge part of this, so having a number of different linebackers in that room that can kind of pick up the slack as needed and give him a rest when he needs it. When he's in the game, he's going to be an absolute game wrecker. So very excited to see what he can do. I think we could be looking at him after week 2 to week 13 as the Butkus Award finalist and front runner because, man, can this dude play football. It's just remarkable to watch every time he's on the field, number 33 for UGA. But another guy that is a little bit on the younger side coming out of his freshman year at Oregon is Mateo Uiagalelei. And if that last name sounds familiar, he is DJ's little brother. He committed to Oregon just before DJ committed to Oregon State. So there was a little bit of a brother connection there in those decisions. But Mateo is up at Oregon now, and he's ready to be the guy. I can't imagine that Dan Lanning is not really on this guy's butt right now. I got to be totally honest, because with Brandon Dorless walking out the door, they need a guy to step up, and Jordan Birch, while very, very talented, didn't necessarily hit the heights that you would hope he would last year. So I think Mateo is going to be a huge piece to this team. So I think Dan Lanning I think that might be the guy that is getting ridden the hardest on the defensive workouts by Dan Lanning for sure. So, but he's someone that could absolutely unlock this defense. They have a number of really talented guys on the back end, led by Jamar Muhammad, the transfer from Washington, and you need pass rush to make all of this work, right? There are a number of defenses that are really good, but struggle to get the quarterback on the ground, and it kills them in a lot of ways. It was the same thing with Texas last year at times. Getting guys on the ground was a struggle, and then the back end looked a little bit worse than they tended to be at some times because when you can't get the guy on the ground, it makes it a lot easier for him to go through his reads and make the right pass. So he's someone that could absolutely explode this Oregon defense, and if he can, burst onto the scene and be the guy that I think he's capable of being just because of his athletic ability, remarkable size, and speed, he's just incredible. So I think it's just a matter of reps. And if he can get those reps and he can take advantage of them, I think this Oregon defensive line could be just remarkable. I think it's really good on paper, but in practice, Mateo Uiagalelei is going to be a huge part of that, of taking that from paper to reality. But now let's go to the back end of the defense just for a second here. Malik Muhammad, a corner out of Texas, is someone that walked onto campus a year ago in January and was probably within 2 months one of the best, if not the best, corner in the entire team. He was a guy that absolutely burst on the scene and got pretty much immediate praise from everyone that was at those practices. He is the cousin of Jabbar Muhammad, the guy that just transferred to Oregon from Washington. So a lot of talented corners in this family. There's no doubt about that. This is a guy that plays the ball incredibly well, plays a lot more physical than his size would necessarily indicate, but he is someone that makes a ton of plays that make you think he is a lot older than going into his sophomore year, because he is so smart. He can play in man coverage, in press, in zone. He can do a number of really good things, and then his ball hawking ability is really second to none, especially on that Texas team. So he's someone that's going to be a huge piece to that. It looks like him and Terrence Brooks are going to be the guys at both the corner positions for Texas, and Malik Muhammad is a dude that could take this defense from really solid and good to elite if he can become, a lockdown corner that takes a elite receiver out of the game every single week, because they're going to be playing some elite receivers. So they're going to need that lockdown guy, and I think Malik Muhammad could absolutely be that guy. But let's go over to the Big 12, the conference that Texas just left, and let's talk about Teo Johnson over at Utah. He is playing nickel, and he played a number of games last year, started 12 of them, but was somewhat overshadowed by the other two incredible guys in that back end of that defense. Sione Vaki and Cole Bishop are just remarkable. So there's only so much praise to go around, but now he's got to carry a little bit more of that weight. He's got to be that leader on and off the field. So very excited to see what he can do. I think he's very interesting for a number of reasons, and the number one reason in my mind is he came into Utah as a wide receiver and then transitioned to nickel after his freshman year. That's something that coaches just love. There is nothing coaches love more than a kid that just wants to be on the football field. They don't care where they are. They don't care, what position they're playing. They just want to be involved, and they want to be able to help their team. And moving to nickel was a great decision because this dude is just incredible. He led the team, or tied for the lead in the team, with 5 pass breakups a year ago. His ball skills are great, obviously. He's someone that absolutely could be a Jim Thorpe candidate throughout this entire year, because Utah is going to be one of the teams that's going to be heard of a lot in the Big 12 this upcoming year. So I would not be surprised if you heard Teo Johnson's name called when we're talking about the NCAA awards down the road at the end of the season. And then finally, let's go back to edge and let's talk about Marvin Jones Jr., transfer from UGA over to Florida State. Physically, he is just incredible. Him coming out of high school, it was just an absolute beast that I think UGA thought was going to be a big-time contributor early on. Didn't really work out the way that they were hoping. He only had 2 sacks and 16 tackles in his 2 years at UGA. Obviously, really hard to get on the field early at UGA, so I think reps is the most important thing for this kid, and I think it also really helps him that you have 2 other guys on this roster that are going to be absolute menaces in the pass rush game anyway. DJ Lundy, who decided to come back after briefly either entertaining the portal or actually jumping into the portal, is back at Florida State, and then Peyton Wilson on the outside, incredible athletes. So both guys that could really help him out because takes a little bit of the pressure off him, and also once he comes into the game, whether it's a third down package or whatever, there are going to be some very tired offensive tackles that he's going to be going up against, so he can take full advantage of that. But he's a guy that is super important to this team because they're losing a guy that is wildly important to that team, or at least was. Jared Verse was incredible over the last couple of years since he transferred over from the University of Albany, and he's someone that you can't replace with one guy, at least not in the short term. Maybe DJ Lundy becomes that guy throughout the season, but it's going to take a couple of guys to replace that production that aggression, that leadership, all of the things that he brought to the table. And Marvin Jones Jr. has just got to be one of those guys for them to be successful. He's someone that is super talented, that has a very high ceiling, but we haven't seen him hit it quite yet. So I really hope that we get to. I hope that he kind of bursts onto the scene and really helps out this Florida State team this upcoming year, because they're going to need a lot of help at edge rusher with one of the best edge rushers in the entire country walking out the door in Jared Verse. But still tons of guys that I didn't get to in this segment, so there will be a part 3. If you have any guys that you think might break out, definitely drop them in the comments, and maybe I can work them into the next segment and give you my take on what they could do this upcoming season, because I know there are a number of teams that I'm a little bit less well-versed in, so would love to hear from you guys. Any team, that you're a fan of, that you're excited to see one particular guy, send them my way, and I'll break down what I think he's capable of. But we're going to take our final break of the show here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about spring games. We are officially in that time of year, and spring games are starting a little bit earlier than some people might be ready for. So we're going to break down the entire schedule and what to expect this particular weekend in in Columbia, Missouri. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the players that could have big time breakout seasons on the defensive side of the ball in 2024. And now we're going to jump into some spring games. We finally have some spring games, and my favorite team in the country right this second is the Missouri Tigers, because they started spring in winter, essentially. They started spring practice, and now they have their spring game this weekend. So if you weren't prepared for spring games, get prepared very quickly, because we got one tomorrow. Missouri kicks it off at 2 p.m. tomorrow, and I could not be more excited to watch that game. There are a ton of things happening over the next, couple of months with spring games, so I thought this would be a good time to give you all the breakdown of the schedule. And the schedule is a little confusing. It is a lot of teams playing on the same days, some teams playing on Tuesdays or Fridays or Thursdays. So I thought this would be the best way to kind of break it all down very easily. So as we talked about, tomorrow at 2 p.m., it is Missouri's time to shine. Cannot wait to see what a number of guys do in that game. We'll get into some questions about that game here in a second. But then the next game up would be this next Friday, a week from today. BYU is going to lace them up. We'll have a couple of questions for that one as well. And then April 6th is when things really start to heat up. We have Clemson, Auburn, NC State, and a personal favorite of mine, UNLV, going to play on this day. A lot to learn, especially about Clemson and NC State in that ACC battle. It'll be very interesting. And then April 12th, the following Friday, Kansas goes kind of standing alone. So if you're a big-time Big 12 fan, I would check out that game, because they are a team that could make a lot of noise in that conference this year. And then April 13th is just wild. It is all over the place, incredible amount of games. We have Ohio State, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Tennessee, Utah, LSU, Penn State, Alabama, Miami, and Ole Miss, and many, many others. So this is the day that you're going to want to lock into as many TVs as you got. Definitely get all of the family around. Definitely overreact to all of the things that you see from your young quarterback or from your young wide receivers, because that's what this time of year is about. But let's continue on here. That following Friday, we do have Louisville, so we get another really good Friday night spring game that I think a lot of people should be locked into, because another team that can make a lot of noise in their conference is Louisville. And then April 20th, another crazy day. We have Notre Dame, Oklahoma, Texas, and Texas A&M, USC, Duke, and South Carolina all playing on this day. Tons of stuff to watch throughout that. You have Malik Murphy taking his first snaps as a Duke Blue Devil. Same thing with Riley Leonard up at Notre Dame. Tons to still learn about Jackson Arnold, so very excited for that day. And then we continue on April 27th. We have West Virginia, Oregon, UCLA, Arizona, and Colorado. So a lot of the new Big 12 teams, old Pac-12 teams playing on that day. Very excited to see what unfolds there. And then for whatever reason, Wisconsin and Washington decided to wait until the very last second to pull theirs off. Wisconsin will be May 2nd, and May 3rd will be Washington. So a ton of really cool games, a ton to look forward to in this time of year, because you get to overreact to a lot, and that's always the real fun part of this time of year. And I think with spring games, it's all about, learning a little bit more about your team, and everyone wants to learn good stuff, right? So you tend to look for all the good stuff, but let's start with a couple of the ones that are going to be happening over the next little bit. Obviously, April 13th and 20th are the big days. Those are the days that you're going to want to be fully locked in. But until then, we do have some really good matchups. So we're going to do kind of a recurring segment where anytime there is a big weekend of spring games, we're going to go through a couple of questions going into those games for each team, and see if we can get some answers to those throughout that spring game. But for the time being, we're going to start with any game that is happening between now and April 6th, because that's when, a lot of stuff starts to happen. You have Clemson, NC State on that day. So figured we would jump in and do Missouri and BYU before everything goes crazy in the month of April. So starting off with Missouri, the big question for me is which running back kind of jumps off the page. Cody Schrader was obviously a huge part of that Missouri success we saw a year ago. He is someone that really was the absolute workhorse of that team, and it's something that Eli Drinkwitz has been known for during his time at Missouri and even other places. He likes to have a guy at running back. He likes to have his workhorse back, and that makes sense. It's a approach that a lot of people go to, because sometimes you just have a dude and you really want to give him that rock, and they did a year ago in Cody Schrader. And now they have two guys that are kind of battling for that position. Nate Noel and Marcus Carroll are both guys that are very talented, did not get a ton of playing time a year ago, but at the end of the day, it's very possible that one of those guys steps up in this game and becomes that workhorse back. Or we could see Drinkwitz kind of change his style and be a little bit more of a rotational running back room. I think both are on the table, but I think Saturday will give us a good idea of which one of those guys, at least early on, is kind of leading to become that workhorse back. And then another problem that I see, or not necessarily a problem, but just something to watch throughout this game on the defensive side of the ball, is the back end of this defense kind of got drained this past year. Chris Abrams' drain. Didn't even plan that. That's really weird. Chris Abrams' drain and Enos Rackstraw are off to the NFL. A huge duo for the Tigers throughout last season and the last number of years, because as we know, having two corners at that level is just an absolute luxury that not everyone has. And these two guys were as good as they come. So replacing him is going to be very, very tough. But they have two guys in the wings that are going to do very well, it seems. Drayden Norwood and Marcus Clark are two corners that have some starting experience and have played a good amount that they are hoping can step into bigger roles this year. And then Toriano Pride Jr., the transfer from Clemson, is going to be huge because they likely will need a little bit more rotation than they had a year ago at that position. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens with those, and if Drayden Norwood or Marcus Clark become the guys, or if Toriano Pride Jr. ends up being the cornerback one at that position. And then finally, the offensive line is something of a question mark. I would argue they actually got more talented, but time will tell, obviously, and Saturday will give us a lot of big answers. They lost two starters from a year ago and replaced them with Caden Green, the Oklahoma transfer that had a lot of people mad at him on Twitter after that decision, and then Javian Richardson, a JUCO pickup, both coming in on the left side of that that offensive line. And so it'll be interesting to see what that looks like because, as we all know, protecting Brady Cook's blind side is going to be the biggest part of this. If he can have time to go through his reads and kind of handle all of the things that are going to be coming at him, he's going to be really successful, and all of that kind of resides on the left tackle and the left guard. And Caden Green is an absolute stud. I think he's one of the best linemen in the entire country, and I think he and Francis Mauanoa from Miami are two sophomores that could absolutely burst onto the scene at that position. And then let's jump into BYU. They play on Friday, March 22nd at 12 p.m. as their spring game. And the biggest question, the one that I'm sure every BYU fan is looking towards right now, is who's going to play in Kingsley Sumataya's spot at left tackle and the O-line overall. They lost a number of guys, 3 starters from a year ago, but Kingsley Sumataya was an absolute dude. It looks like Braden Keem is set to take over there. Big shoes to fill. He needs to be essentially lights out in the spring game to make fans feel a little bit better about that position, but huge shoes to fill, and we'll see on Saturday if he can start to fill them at least. And then Jake Ratzlaff, can he be the guy fully? I mean, he came in the last 4 years, or last 4 games last year, and played very meh football, let's be honest. Had a 50% completion percentage, 3 touchdowns, 3 picks, did have 3 rushing touchdowns, so does bring a little bit of that to the game, but he's someone that needs to step up if they're going to make any noise in this conference. Obviously, a team that is not getting a lot of love in the early markets for the Big 12, but still very talented and can do a number of things. So it'll be interesting to see how he looks on Saturday because it'll give a lot of BYU fans either worries or a lot of confidence going into this season, depending on how he can look on Saturday. This, again, will be a reoccurring segment. Every time there is a big spring game weekend, we will jump into all of the questions surrounding those games. There are a number of big-time questions that some other teams have to answer, so we'll be back on this when the April 6th date rolls around, and we'll ask questions about Clemson and NC State and all of the teams that you need to know about. And then, obviously, the 13th and the 20th of April are absolutely mad days, so we will jump into all of those when they come, but spring ball is underway, and it's going to be an awesome time of year where we get a number of overreactions, we get a number of crazy comments about a young quarterback that don't necessarily pan out, but it's a good time of year to do it, right? We're so far away from football, might as well entertain ourselves somehow. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a ton to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show and leave a positive review. It's a huge help, and it does make a difference. Also, follow us on all of our social platforms, Facebook, Twitter, or X, TikTok, Instagram, to get all of the content and updates. We have a number of people covering every sport you could possibly think of, from baseball to wrestling to basketball to college football right here. But a ton of people doing a ton of incredible work, so definitely tune in to all of our different platforms and keep up to date on everything you could possibly need to keep up to date on. But Thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys on Monday.
Let's go.